Thank you so much, Craig, and thanks everyone. We are really excited to be presenting today on the use of real-world evidence within a new discipline that some of you might not be very familiar with which is health technology assessment, or HTA. So, Jamie, if you can start sharing the presentation. So this work actually, part of it was presented at the OHDSI Europe Symposium, and the whole idea came during an OHDSI call like this, one of the community calls where we had a quick discussion about how we can actually have real-world studies or real-world evidence studies that respond to decision makers' need and can be used directly to inform decision-making by regulators or HTA agencies. And one of the routes to that is using the research recommendations that these agencies put forward to the research community to do in order to generate the evidence required for decision-making. So this is the topic that we are focusing on today, all of the four presenters today. So we will start, both me and Jamie. On the next slide, you will see that the two of us, we work within the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, or NICE, in the UK. So I'm a senior scientific advisor responsible for delivering NICE research activities on a number of European funded projects. Many of them are actually focused on the use of real-world data and real-world evidence. And one of them is EDEN, IMI EDEN, which uses the OMOP Common Data Model as a core part of its infrastructure. And we are leading work package 2, or co-leading work package 2 in that in the project. So both of us are managing the research activities within work package 2 of EDEN to generate evidence or to demonstrate the value of using the OMOP Common Data Model for HTA decision making and outcomes-based or outcomes-driven healthcare. So first of all, what is NICE and what's HTA very quickly? So NICE is the Health Technology Assessment Agency for England specifically. So within the UK, we have other HTA agencies. We have All Wales Medicine Strategy Group for Wales, and also the Scottish Medicines Consortium that makes the decisions for Scotland. But NICE is the main national HTA agency within England, and its core role is to provide guidance to the healthcare system or the National Health Service in England about the use of new medicines, more broadly within its technology assessment program, but also other new health technologies, for example, diagnostics or medical devices or digital health more recently, and apps, and so the software used as a medical device, interventional procedures as well. So we provide guidance for a range of new health technologies, and this is using key principles. So the use of evidence-based medicine approaches. All our guidance should be underpinned by evidence and should be developed in a transparent way. And there is a clear rationale that's drawn from the evidence, the published evidence of our recommendations. And another core principle of our work is that we take into account the opportunity cost of funding specific interventions. So the idea that if you commit funding to provide a new technology or a new medicine, then you are actually taking that funding away from a currently funded service or product. So there is an opportunity cost for each of these funding decisions or for these recommendations. And taking that into account means that we have to make decisions that make the best use of the available resources for a nationally funded system like the UK. Of course, the system is different. The healthcare financing system is different for different countries. And for example, from the European perspective, there are a number of HTA agencies within Europe in the different countries, and they have different approaches that they use that might be different slightly from NICE. And we will see also today with our colleagues from Sweden presenting their approaches and how they also generate guidance and also based on that research recommendations, as we will see through the presentation. But this is a quick just a definition, if you like, of what is HTA is trying to do. But if you want to learn the basics of HTA and how it is conducted and how real-world evidence is used within or by HTA agencies, I would recommend you registering for our EDEN Academy course, which is a free course that's available in EDEN Academy, actually called Introduction to Health Technology Assessment. So NICE actually, as an HTA agency, has made a clear commitment, as you can see in our latest strategy that's just been published earlier last year, NICE strategy for 21 to 26, to actually develop world-leading capabilities and standards of using routinely the real-world data in order to inform all aspects of our work. So not only even within HTA as a health technology assessment activity, but also we develop clinical guidelines and public health guidelines and social care guidelines. So both our clinical guidelines and our HTA recommendations should be underpinned by the best available evidence. And that includes using real-world evidence. And this is a move that has been underpinned actually by research activities that we have been involved in for a number of years now through European-funded projects such as IMI Get Real, for example, and then IMI Eden and Harmony. So we have been involved in research in this area for quite a while now and feel that we can now move into implementing that into our guidance development processes. So from now on, I'll hand over to Jamie to explain how we develop our guidance and how we make research recommendation based on that guidance as well. So over to you, Jamie.
Perfect. Thank you, Dalia. Yeah, so we thought you might be interested in how HTA organisations reach their evidence-based healthcare guidance. So at NICE, we identify the best available evidence for a given decision problem, sometimes about whether to use a new healthcare technology like, I guess, a medicine or a device, sometimes about how to optimize current care pathways. And then we scrutinize the evidence, and an independent committee will discuss that, discuss what the evidence implies for practice, and hopefully the evidence will be compelling enough for them to make recommendations for what the healthcare system should do. Often best available evidence means RCT data, but not always, as Dalia has touched on. So lots of NICE guidance products and documents have used explicitly real-world evidence to inform pieces of the puzzle. So there's a list here from characterization to finding baseline data upon which you could apply a treatment effect that you've identified from a trial, extrapolating beyond short-term trial data, identifying health inequalities, and so on. When these slides are circulated, the links on the slide will take you to a piece of guidance that has used real-world evidence for the purpose shown. But towards achieving our strategic goal of making better use of real-world evidence more routinely, we've recently published a real-world evidence framework, very recently, actually, this summer just gone. The framework explains where we think real-world evidence might be best placed to inform our guidance, and also describes what we'd like to see from such evidence in terms of its methodological quality and transparent reporting. It's not intended to be a minimum standard or a checklist or anything like that, but we just hope that it can raise the bar, and it will also hopefully ensure that NICE is a big organisation. We're producing lots of guidance. It will hopefully ensure that we're using real-world evidence in a consistent way. So back to our usual guidance development process, there are times where a critical evidence gap becomes apparent that blocks the committee from making a strong recommendation for healthcare practice. And in this situation, NICE can make what we call a research recommendation, which is essentially a call for more evidence to address the uncertainty. It's NICE saying, there's a barrier here that we can't get over. We want to see this study undertaken. We want to see this evidence, please. So earlier this year, before the European OHDSI Symposium, we interrogated our own database of research recommendations, looking for live examples where NICE has explicitly asked for real-world evidence studies to be conducted. So anyone can search our database of research recommendations. The link is on this slide, and if you filter for terms like observational and real world, you'll find specific examples and be linked to specific pieces of guidance where we've asked for real world evidence studies. Notably, our research recommendations are linked with the UK's Health Services Research Funder, NIHR. You can see in the box on the right there. they have a rolling call for applications, for funding for applications for studies that specifically try to address one of our research recommendations. So there's a direct link there between, we're not just shouting into the void here. Hopefully these research recommendations can get acted upon and inform future updates of our guidance. When we interrogated that database back in spring, we identified 22 live research recommendations that explicitly asked for real-world evidence studies. We looked within the last 5 years, and by live, I mean that research hasn't, to our knowledge, been conducted, or the recommendation hasn't been stood down. These were across several of our guidance products that Dalia described. Since then, we know that some more have been published, and given NICE's strategy and its very public willingness to explore and accept using non-RCT evidence more routinely, I expect this number will grow quite quickly in the near future, in months and years to come. I very briefly presented a couple of examples, specific research recommendations at the symposium in Rotterdam, but in the next few slides, I'll talk about a few more in a bit more detail, and I'll include some of those very recently published, sort of hot off the press research recommendations. Firstly, in the field of ophthalmology, this is the oldest one that I'll present. It was published in early 2018, this research recommendation, but I'm presenting it because I worked on this, and it's a really interesting disease area. It's a really interesting decision problem. So treatment for age-related macular degeneration is intravitreal injections into the eye, and the disease erodes visual acuity over time. These treatments are standard care in the UK and many other countries. They are not very nice to have. They mean going to hospital. They can be quite expensive for the health system, and treatment can go on for quite a long period of time. At the moment, there's a real evidence gap in around when those treatments should be stopped. There's a quite strong hypothesis that if treatment's successful, it can manage the condition such that it becomes kind of dormant, and then you could remove treatment quite safely with no significant loss to vision. On the flip side, if treatment's not really working, it's ineffective, there might be no benefit to putting patients through the inconvenience and potential harms of having this treatment for no effect. So the specific research recommendation here is for large retrospective observational research to try and understand and establish the point at which benefits of continuing treatment with these common injections becomes unclear, involving both eyes that have responded well to treatment and eyes that appear not to be responding very well to treatment. This was written up as potentially a stepping stone to provide the ethical basis for an RCT, where you can compare a protocol-dependent stopping rules based on what the observational study tells us about when treatment benefit might cease, versus what currently happens, which is clinician discretion, essentially. So this is the oldest one I'll present, but I think it's a really interesting decision problem. I think all the rest are from this year. So this one's in the field of area of lung cancer, and this comes from one of our diagnostic pieces of guidance. So there's a diagnostic test for assessing the risk of lung cancer called early CTD lung. The evidence gap that the committee identified was that there's not really a good understanding of the patient population with lung nodules, not yet having lung cancer, but these nodules that may lead to or develop into cancer. And there's also not a very good understanding of the diagnostic pathways, certainly in the UK for lung cancer. So the research recommendation that came off the back of that evidence gap was we'd like to see a large retrospective audit or analysis to understand things like, essentially understand this disease and this diagnostic pathway a bit better. So what do patient characteristics and lung nodules mean for the risk of ultimately getting a malignancy, disease progression? What does current practice look like for people with lung nodules? And also, can we see anything from the data about the likelihood of these people potentially having, for example, unnecessary treatment or misdiagnosis? Essentially, we need to characterize this population much better. A couple of very recent guideline updates in NICE's suite of diabetes guidance products as of summer this year. So these are in type 1 diabetes in adults, diagnosis and management, and also our diabetes guideline focusing on both types in children. A couple of evidence gaps were found. So in type 1 diabetes is treated quite differently to other types, particularly in terms of insulin use. It's known that misdiagnosis can be quite harmful, but there seems to be a shift in the type 1 diabetes population in the UK, where previously clinical features that you wouldn't tend to see as typical for type 1, like high BMI, are becoming more prominent in people with type 1. And also people being diagnosed with uncertain classifications of diabetes are becoming more common. And another evidence gap is that the effect of continuous glucose monitoring technologies, which are available and exist, the actual effect of those is not well understood at the moment. So the research recommendations asking for real world evidence off the back of those are, can we predict the best clinical features or combinations of features to distinguish between type 1 diabetes and other types? At the moment, clinicians might just rely on BMI or one or two characteristics. Can we inform that in a better way? And also on the right-hand side, so based on real-world data, what's the evidence that continuous glucose monitoring is any good? Is it effective at improving glycemic control? Is it cost effective in both adults with type 1 and also in children with any type of diabetes? Lastly, a couple of slides on some of our medical technologies guidance. So the evidence gap, this is from March this year for an app called My COPD for people to self-manage their COPD. They can either self-manage it at home, or there's also a population of people that might use it having been admitted to secondary care rehabilitation. Quite a lot of uncertainties were identified in this evidence base. So there's a call for high quality comparative observational studies around the use of My COPD. And we also this research recommendation also lists some key outcomes in this population that we'd like to see to understand whether this app actually does what it purports to do or not. Also a couple of secondary ones at the bottom there. So research recommendations suggesting that real world data could provide some really important information to inform our economic modelling, which is, Dalia mentioned opportunity cost earlier. It's really important for NICE to understand the economic value, the cost effectiveness of these, of any medical intervention, any healthcare intervention. And a key input into the economic analysis for this was what's the uptake of My COPD if it was implemented into practice. So could we get some real world data on that? And also some real world evidence about patient experience of using it in terms of both whether they like it or not, and also do they stop using it or not. Lastly, from May this year, the condition is insomnia, and the app is another medical technology called Sleepio. So this was just essentially quite an uncertain evidence base, again, as medical devices and technologies often are. So in people that would otherwise be eligible for face-to-face CBT for their insomnia, we want to know, is Sleepio any good? So a study based on real-world evidence looking at the clinical outcomes and resource use data in this population would be useful, and also again to inform the economic model in the cost effectiveness analysis. Can we interrogate real evidence to understand if there's any link between people using Sleepio and what happens to their healthcare resource use? So that concludes a brief tour of some of our live research recommendations, specifically asking for real world evidence generation. Thank you for listening. Please do get in touch, and thanks for the opportunity to present to the community. I do hope this was of interest, and I'll now hand over to colleagues from Sweden. I'll suggest that we jointly take comments and questions at the end, if that's okay.
So, thanks, Jamie. Very interesting presentation. I will now try and share mine, I guess. And bear with me here. So I think you see my presentation at the moment. So my name is Maria Osterberg, and I am here with my colleague Lena Wallgren. And thank you for letting us have this presentation and talking about our work with the evidence gaps. And a great thanks to Jamie and Dalia, who actually shared this presentation with us, because they were the ones asking us to come and join them. And SBU, it's not the most well-known governmental agency in the world. It's not even nationally well-known in some cases. Stands for the Swedish Agency of Health Technology Assessment and Assessment of Social Services. And I do not think that you will remember that name in the end. So SBU is okay. And as I say, we are a governmental agency, and we do HTA as nice. We do not do recommendations. That's another Swedish agency doing that. And I think I might be a bit saying the same things as Dalia sometimes, but as you know, HTA is when you do a systematic review and assess all of the scientific studies for a certain intervention or for a certain area or condition, and then you add on certain aspects to the results, like health economy, or we often add ethics or social aspects, and discuss that in relation to the results of the systematic review. And SBU covers all of healthcare and social services, so that's our main focus. And when you assess all of the studies within a certain topic, you not only get what is known, what is the effects, you also get these evidence gaps. What do we don't know? And what are the outcomes we don't know anything about, for examples? And that's why I'm here. And before I start to talk about our database, we quite often talk about how to increase the benefit of practice-based research. And we do that in combination with discussing the database, because when we assess research, it's obvious that a lot of stuff is not useful as it should be. So when we discuss research, we quite often say that before you start research, please do some sort of systematic assessment of the studies already known, so you identify the evidence gaps. And in the database, we do that. So we do the systematic review and we identify the gaps. But then also, if you have an area, for example, I now work in lipidemia, where almost everything is evidence gaps, all the treatments, the diagnosis, and everything, then you might want to do some sort of prioritization of these research questions. So you want to have some sort of information, what is the most important questions out there? And then we use a method that were developed by a British organization called James Lind Alliance, where you bring in patients, carers, relatives, and clinicians to say, what do we think is the most important research questions? And then you should do the practice-based research. And of course, in our systematic reviews or HTA reports, then we also discuss by using the former research, what kind of information can we give to the ones doing new research on how that research could be done, so we will get better answers. So, for example, we did a report on endometriosis a few years ago, and even though there's a lot of studies on different treatments for endometriosis, almost all of the interventions and treatments ended up as evidence gaps. So in that report, we said that there's a need for using the same outcomes. So doing or developing a core outcome set would be good for this disease. And also we can say, like for that condition, that all of the research done in this area is done on women that is over 18. So even though this is a condition that probably starts during puberty, none of the studies are on young girls. So those are the kind of information that you could get from our reports. And in this wheel, we also bring forward the users of research, or the end users of research, the patients, the clinicians, and so forth, that are affected by the research done. So now to the main topic, the evidence gaps. As I say, we take evidence gaps from our reports and put them on a database. And we are a Swedish governmental agency, so all of the evidence gaps are in Swedish, but we quite recently started to translate them to English, and I will show you a bit later. And the reason we have evidence gaps is to inform researchers and as well as funders about topics or areas where there is a need for new clinical research. And we put these research questions in whenever there's a new report. So we do this all year round. But there's no, like for NICE, they as Jamie said, that they have the most important questions. We put in all of the evidence gaps that we find in our report. So we do not prioritize if we do not do one of these James Lind Alliance thingies. And then it's not us prioritizing, it's patients and relatives and clinicians. So here's our page in English about evidence gaps. So if you press evidence gaps on the top line there, the puzzle, then you come to this side where we actually gives a short information about what we think about evidence gaps. And on this side, you have the search engine, and this is only for evidence gaps. So if you want to see what kind of publications we have, you have to go to the main page or publication page. So this search is only for evidence gaps. And as there. And as you can see, we do not have a lot of gaps in English at the moment. We have 71. So we just recently started translate them from Swedish to English. And the ones that are in the database that's English right now are the youngest ones, or so to say. In Sweden, or in Swedish, we have a bit more than 1,000 gaps that are younger than 5 years, because if they're older than 5 years, we archive them. You can still see them, but we say it's, well, they're quite old, so we don't show them if you're not really, or you have to make a decision if you want to show them. So if you're interested in a gap, and if you go to this database and see, well, there's nothing in it for me, then you are most welcome to email us or to contact us in any way, and we can search the Swedish database, of course. We do not sort our gaps by study design. So we only sort them by population or intervention. So this is the things that differs from our gaps from NICE. So here's everything. So some might be very useful for observational studies, but some might only be useful for RCTs. So, and I will also also just give a few examples about areas where we find that observational data could be really useful. And I heard from NICE you are much further along with using observational data or real world data. So we could really be better in that sense. But here's one gap that we put in quite recently. So it's cognitive behavioral therapy for fibromyalgia. And I'm not sure if that's the way to say it in English, but anyway. So as you can see, you might think that, well, this is more of a question for an RCT, and it might be, but as you also see, we really would like to have more data on side effects and risks. And their RCTs are not the optimum study design. So we would like to have more observational data on side effects. And if you see on the whole, we have seen also in other reports that when it comes to psychological treatments, side effects and risk are not that commonly studied. So that's why we choose this example, because there we see that there is a need for more information regarding side effects and risk of that treatment. And here is another example of where we think that our observational data would be very useful. So this is organization of care question. And organization of care here is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, but we have quite a lot of organization of care gaps. And also when you do this prioritization of research gaps, organization of care comes up as highly prioritized both by caregivers or clinicians, as well as patients and relatives. So this is an important area to study. And one of the last examples the last example I would give you in this PowerPoint is interventions that can be hard to randomize, like diets, for example. They need a lot of time to see the outcomes. It's hard to randomize someone for a certain kind of diet or food. So then we most of the time use observational data for these questions. And this is a recent report, and this also say that there's a gap for diets for gestational diabetes, but this report brings out a lot of different kinds of gaps. And also it's really funny because one of the diabetes evidence gap that Jamie brought up, we also have that one in our database. Actually, it's a bit old, but when you brought it up, it's probably still relevant. So one other area where we see that there's a strong need for observational data can also be like hard to randomize when it comes to ethics. For example, we just recently did a report on gender dysphoria for youth and grown-ups. And there we almost always look for observational data when it comes to treatment and long-term effects and psychological effects, etc., because it can be ethically hard to randomize the different kind of interventions given, but it's also a really small population having gender dysphoria. So it might be better using observational data in those cases. So, and that was actually all from me. So I'll stop there and you can ask me anything almost.
Thank you so much, Mary and Lena, of course. And Craig, we are open for questions, I guess.
Thank you, Dalia, Jamie, and Marie for the presentations. Let's just open it up to questions. So if anybody has any questions, you just raise your hand and we can and you can ask to anybody. There is also plenty of great information on the chat. I know based on how you join these calls, some people don't have access, but if you do, there's some great links and some great comments already in the chat. Christian, go ahead.
Yeah, hi guys. Question, and forgive me if the question was partially answered. I was a little late coming into it. The evidence gaps or the choices of what you decide needs to be worked on. Where's that coming from? So who says that diabetes has an evidence gap, or gender dysphoria or whatever? Where's that coming from?
So shall I start? So we always take our evidence gaps from the HTA reports, where we did a systematic review on the existing knowledge or existing studies on those interventions or on that condition. So for gender dysphoria, for example, we just recently published a systematic review on different kind of treatments for young people and also for grown-ups. So we always just take out gaps where we actually know the base or the research that's already published or existing.
No, I understand that, but why would you go to and have a review about, let's pick this example, gender dysphoria. There are thousands of open scientific questions, okay, that you could take and go for. How do you know something is hot?
So we are governmental agencies, so most of the time we get our topics from the government, and it's also we work in close collaboration with the agency, the Swedish agency, doing recommendations. So it depends on what kind of recommendations that they are to update or are to do new ones on. So we do the systematic reviews for the recommendations, but most of the times we get our assignments from the government.
I guess similarly was nice that it's a referral for the guidelines. The topics are referred from the Department of Health to NICE to develop a guidance for a specific, for example, disease area. And the committee, the guideline development committee that develops the recommendations will be based its recommendations on systematic reviews. So the different questions are agreed in advance that the guideline will address these specific questions. Each of them are underpinned by systematic review of the evidence, whatever the type of evidence that's relevant to the question. And then the committee would discuss these. And if the evidence is strong enough to make a recommendation, a practice-changing recommendation, they would put a recommendation to the National Health Service that you should use this, or you should do this type of intervention, or implement this type of intervention. But if they identify that actually there is an evidence gap there, we don't have any evidence, and research is important, we specify this as a research recommendation, but we have a maximum number for each guideline to give research recommendation. So for us, there is a prioritization process. The committee needs to agree on the top priorities to put forward as a research recommendation in this area.
Great, thank you, Christian, for that question. Andrew.
This is such an exciting set of presentations. Thank you so much for presenting. The OHDSI community engages in methods research and tries to develop open science practices that are elevating the role of observational evidence for decisions like the ones that you all are making recommendations about. And so there's a whole set of programs that are trying to increase the reliance on and the status of the kind of evidence generated from large-scale observational research. And I don't know the extent to which you're fully aware of all of that in the community, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on the key things you think would really help advance that mission of the community. So I guess maybe doubts that are in your mind or your colleagues' minds as they calculate the relative importance of evidence from trials versus evidence from observational studies that could be addressed through good methods research or demonstrations of the reproducibility of research, other things like this. If you have thoughts on that, that would be exciting and helpful.
I'm happy to go first with this one. So from NICE's perspective, I think that we've put it given that we've put it so front and center to our kind of strategic ambition and objectives, means that the community, broad community involved in this, is doing something right. You know, it's filtering to us. It's on our agenda, and we recognise the kind of move in this direction. I think in terms of doing more, it would be really great if it just happened more frequently, where a network study or an observational study, we could just point at it and say, this answers the question, this answers the problem that NICE had. And the more that happens over time, it will just become, it will increasingly become, you know, people will take notice in the sort of the big chairs. And I think I mentioned in October, when we audited our database of these recommendations, there were 22 in April, sorry, and we know that there have been 5 or 6 published since then. And I think that number is going to increase exponentially with the strategic acceptance for real world evidence. And I think that will, again, quantitatively demonstrate that I think the community is doing the right stuff and is visible, and it just takes a bit of time to filter to big agencies like NICE.
I'd add as well, Andrew, is that methods research is very important. You flagged that. So when we developed our RWE framework, a lot of many of the recommendations or the recommended approaches were really about being transparent and clear about the method. I mean, like open science principles are there front and center, of course, and to increase the trustworthiness of the observational research that's being published, so we can actually assess it and use it. We also recommended, and we have also put in our framework data suitability assessment tool, so that refers to what sources of how suitable they are to the questions being asked. So it's important to ensure that within the OHDSI community, also the data partners that are mapping their tools actually the data quality dashboard, for example, the work that's being done on that is very useful for ensuring that credibility of the data sources. But also, as I said, methods research in general is very important. There is a lot of uncertainty still about the best methods to answer each question, if you like. So specifically what HTA agencies are concerned about is using observational evidence for relative or comparative effectiveness assessment. So more methods development in this area specifically, I would say, is very useful.
I don't know, but I think that NICE have gone along a way of thinking about using real world data than we actually have. But of course, we are using them, observational data. I think we have a well, I think we are discussing the positive side of the observational data is the larger number of included participants and so forth, a longer time period of studying. But of course, they have the downside of methods or so. But also in Sweden, I think it's really interesting seeing the development of how to use registries as RCTs and doing these registry-based RCTs. So I think that's a development where we find it really, because then you can have a very larger number of participants in an RCT where you actually is checking interventions used in healthcare where we don't know what kind of effect that they have. but using the RCT as well as the registries. So I think that's really interesting development.
Thank you, Andrew, for that question. Patrick.
And thank you all for your presentation. This was really exciting to me. I guess I'm particularly motivated by seeing the specific questions that you all are sharing as explicit opportunities for OHDSI network studies, and seeing very clearly like how we could take our standardized tools and apply them to the questions you're asking. I guess my question for you all is just to understand how we can ensure that we have the appropriate impact and deliver the value that you need in order to make use of the information. Like if we were to take any of these questions that Jamie, you've highlighted, or Marie, that are on your website, if we were to take one, how would you recommend that we go forward with initiating a study and ensuring that we deliver the results in the format and within the timelines that you need in order to make decisions? I'm worried about us just going off and doing something and not being relevant to the decision-making processes that you all are under. So how would you recommend we engage with you all on these questions if there's something that we can do as a community?
So that could happen, as I said, usually there is a cycle for that. These research recommendations comes out of a guideline, at the back of a guideline production process. And once there is new evidence that's generated and it's published as peer-reviewed publication, it's usually we have our surveillance teams that picks up any new evidence that's likely to influence our recommendations, and that leads to perhaps a recommendation of an update of that a partial update of the guideline, or an update of a recommendation from the guideline if there is evidence to suggest that we actually need to make a change. So this is what the standard way of picking up the evidence, which is not an active if you like, action from the researchers who are generating the evidence, but also we get approached by researchers who have developed or published evidence that's related to a specific guideline to inform us of their new evidence or the new publication in that area. And in that case, it is brought to our attention much more or quickly, if you like, than relying on our standard surveillance methods. Equally, at the moment, the easiest way is using some of our research activity, for example, use cases to address some of our needs. So we are doing this within Eden, for example, and in our work package 2 work. We are trying to have some use cases that demonstrate the value of network studies, specifically as Eden is doing that. Mainly is working with the common data model, that we can demonstrate its value. So for us, we are open for direct approaches for activity within this area that can address some of these open research questions that are available, and we can kind of collaborate on that so that the output can be picked up even much quicker, if you like, by our agencies. Jamie, I'm not sure if you have any addition on that as well.
I don't think so. I think that covers it. I don't know if Marie.
Yeah, I think actually, to be honest, I think you and NICE are much further along with almost this wheel of research. Like you NICE have both the HTA and the recommendations. In Sweden, that's divided. So not all of our systematic reviews are going for recommendations. They can be just for decision making in the government or some other decisions. So sometimes, to be honest, it's more like the government wants to see, do we know anything about this? Because and we don't really know what they are doing with our reports afterwards. So, but so we only put them in the database as they are, and then we do update, or the other agency updates recommendation on a regular basis. So when we present evidence gaps that are linked to both recommendations and our reports, then we state that this is both a recommendation at this other agency and from a report in our place. So, and then, you know, these also, they also check the if there are any new studies on a regular basis, and then you update the recommendations. So those, if it's both a recommendation and report from us, then new studies on that area would be incorporated and see, is the evidence base changed? Do we know anything? Can we change the recommendation? But we also, when we do like this diet for when having diabetes, diets when having diabetes, this is our own report, and sometimes we do update those also, but they are not on a regular basis. So it's just if we need to update this report, or that it could be that we know that there's a lot new research on this area, or we need to see if there's a lot more research on this area. So that's not regular, that's just on a need or resource basis that we do those. But I'm open for any suggestions that you can have that makes this wheel of research flow more efficiently. So.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would definitely strongly encourage our whole Odyssey community to pay close attention to. I receive requests on a pretty regular basis where somebody in the community is motivated to make use of their data, maybe motivated to use Odyssey tools, but doesn't necessarily have a specific passion in a particular clinical area or question, and just wants to do important, good work that would be something that could be demonstrable to make an impact. And I think that what you all have laid out is very clearly a set of questions there where there's a clear path towards impact, where if we can fill the evidence gap and meet the needs of your agencies, then there can be a direct connection between the evidence that was generated and the impact it'll have on policy decision making. So strongly encourage the community to look through these list of items, and maybe to continue the challenge. I really hope to see that Odyssey is going to initiate a network study to at least address one of these issues in the near future, if for no other reason to demonstrate what we as a community can do to meet the HTA needs.